Welcome to the Story Lab. I hope you enjoy this video. Let's begin. The alarm blared, jolting me from sleep. I reached over, silencing it with a practiced tap. Beside me, Laura stirred. Her blonde hair splayed across the pillow. "Morning already," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. I leaned over, planting a kiss on her forehead. "Afraid so. Big day at the office." Laura's eyes fluttered open, a smile playing on her lips. "Every day's a big day for you, Jeremy." I chuckled, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. "That's what keeps us in this nice house, doesn't it?" As I showered and dressed, my mind was already racing with the day's agenda. Being the lead counsel for Harper Tech wasn't just a job, it was a calling. I straightened my tie, giving myself a once-over in the mirror. At 35, I was at the top of my game, respected by my peers and valued by the company. Laura appeared in the doorway, holding out a travel mug of coffee. "Don't forget to eat something," she said, concern etched on her face. I took the mug, pulling her close for a kiss. "What would I do without you?" "Starve, probably," she quipped, her green eyes twinkling. The drive to the office was uneventful, the radio droning on about stock prices and mergers. I barely registered it, my mind already at work. As I strode through the lobby of Harper Tech's gleaming headquarters, I nodded to familiar faces. "Morning, Mr. Walton," chirped the receptionist. "Morning, Sarah. Any messages?" She handed me a stack of pink slips. "Just these." "Oh, and Mr. Harper wants to see you in his office." I frowned slightly. Richard Harper, tech mogul and my boss, rarely called for impromptu meetings. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll head there now." Richard's office occupied the entire top floor, a testament to his ego as much as his success. I rapped on the door, entering at his gruff, "Come in." Richard stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his imposing figure silhouetted against the city skyline. He turned, a grin splitting his face. "Jeremy, just the man I wanted to see." I approached, shaking his outstretched hand. "What can I do for you, Richard?" He clapped me on the shoulder, steering me towards a plush leather chair. "It's more what I can do for you, my boy. We're having a little soiree tonight, a celebration of our recent successes. I want you there." I blinked, surprised. "I'm flattered, Richard, but—" He waved a hand, cutting me off. "No buts. You've been instrumental in our growth this quarter. Time you got some recognition. Bring that lovely wife of yours. Laura, isn't it?" I nodded, a mix of pride and unease settling in my stomach. "Yes, Laura. I'm sure she'd be delighted." Richard's grin widened. "Excellent. 8 o'clock, my place. Don't be late." As I left his office, my phone buzzed. A text from Laura. "Lunch today?" I smiled, typing back, "Can't today. Rain check?" "Big news for tonight, though." Her reply came quickly. "Ooh, intriguing. Tell me over dinner?" "Better," I responded. "Pack that red dress you love. We're going to a party." The rest of the day flew by in a whirlwind of meetings and phone calls. By the time I made it home, Laura was already dressed, the red dress hugging her curves perfectly. "You look stunning," I said, kissing her cheek. She beamed, adjusting my tie. "You clean up pretty well yourself, counselor. Now, what's this party about?" As we drove to Richard's mansion, I filled her in. "It's a celebration of the company's success. Richard specifically invited us." Laura's eyes widened. "Richard Harper? Your boss? Jeremy, that's amazing." I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "It's a big opportunity, that's for sure." Richard's mansion was a monument to excess, all gleaming marble and soaring columns. As we entered, a waiter offered us champagne. Laura took a flute, her eyes darting around in barely concealed awe. "Jeremy, Laura." Richard's booming voice carried over the crowd. He approached, resplendent in a tailored suit. "So glad you could make it." I shook his hand. "Wouldn't miss it, Richard. This is my wife, Laura." Richard took Laura's hand, brushing his lips against her knuckles. "Enchanted, my dear. Jeremy's a lucky man." I noticed a slight flush creep up Laura's neck. "The pleasure's all mine, Mr. Harper. Your home is beautiful." Richard waved a hand dismissively. "Please call me Richard. And this? This is just a humble abode." Let me give you the grand tour. As Richard led us through room after opulent room, I couldn't help but notice how attentively Laura listened to his every word. Her eyes sparkled as he regaled us with tales of his business triumphs and exotic travels. "And this," Richard said, opening a set of ornate doors, "is my pride and joy." We stepped into a cavernous room lined with bookshelves. At the center stood a massive desk, behind which hung a larger-than-life portrait of Richard. "My office," he announced proudly, "where the magic happens." Laura ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books. "It's incredible," she breathed. Richard sidled up to her, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Perhaps you'd like to see my rare first editions?" I cleared my throat, an inexplicable unease settling over me. "We should probably get back to the party, don't you think?" Richard's eyes never left Laura as he nodded. Of course. Duty calls." As we made our way back to the main hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Laura's hand felt cold in mine, her gaze distant. "You okay?" I murmured. She startled slightly, then smiled. "Of course, just a bit overwhelmed. It's not every day we rub elbows with the rich and famous." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Don't worry, we'll be home soon." But as the night wore on, that promise felt increasingly hollow. Laura drifted from conversation to conversation, her laughter carrying across the room. More often than not, I'd spot her in Richard's orbit, hanging on his every word. By the time we left, a knot had formed in my stomach. In the car, Laura was uncharacteristically quiet. "Did you enjoy yourself?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She nodded, her gaze fixed out the window. "It was illuminating." I frowned, unsure how to interpret her response. "Richard certainly knows how to throw a party." Laura hummed in agreement. "He's quite the man, isn't he?" Something in her tone made me glance over sharply, but her face was hidden in shadow. I tried to dismiss the unease creeping up my spine, focusing instead on the road ahead. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes in Laura. She seemed distracted, often lost in thought. Our conversations, once flowing and easy, became stilted and superficial. More than once, I caught her checking her phone with an odd intensity, only to quickly put it away when she noticed my gaze. One evening, as we sat in silence over dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. "Laura, is everything okay?" She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I set down my fork, leaning forward. "You've been different lately, distant. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But then she smiled, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "I'm fine, Jeremy. Just a bit stressed with work. You know how it is." I nodded, not entirely convinced but unwilling to push further. "Okay, but you know I'm here if you need to talk, right?" "I know," she said softly. "I'm lucky to have you." As I cleared the dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers. But I pushed the thought aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. Laura loved me. We were happy, weren't we? The day started like any other. I woke up, kissed Laura goodbye, and headed to the office. But as I sat at my desk, shuffling through papers, my secretary poked her head in. "Mr. Walton? Mr. Harper needs you to stop by his house. Says he needs to sign some urgent documents." I frowned, checking my watch. It was unlike Richard to conduct business from home. "Did he say what documents?" She shook her head. "Just that it's urgent and confidential." Sighing, I gathered my briefcase. "All right, I'm on my way." The drive to Richard's mansion was familiar now, though I hadn't been back since the party. As I pulled up the winding driveway, I noticed another car parked near the entrance. My heart skipped a beat. It was Laura's car. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "There has to be an explanation." I approached the front door, my hand hesitating over the doorbell. Then, steeling myself, I used the key Richard had given me for emergencies. The foyer was silent, but I heard muffled voices from upstairs. With each step up the grand staircase, my heart pounded louder. The voices grew clearer as I approached Richard's office. I recognized Laura's laugh, followed by Richard's deep chuckle. I stood outside the door, my hand on the knob, every fiber of my being screaming at me to turn around, to pretend I'd never come. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed open the door. The scene before me seared itself into my brain. Laura, perched on Richard's desk, her blouse half unbuttoned. Richard, standing between her legs, his hands on her waist. Their lips locked in a passionate kiss. For a moment, the world stood still. Then Laura's eyes met mine, and she gasped, pushing Richard away. "Jeremy." Her voice was high, panicked. "This isn't. I can explain." I felt something break inside me. My voice, when it came, was cold and steady. "Can you? Can you explain why my wife is in my boss's office, half undressed?" Richard straightened, his face a mask of cool indifference. "Now, Jeremy, let's not overreact." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Overreact? You're fucking my wife, and you're telling me not to overreact?" Laura slid off the desk, reaching for me. "Jeremy, please. It's not what you think." I stepped back, my hands clenched into fists. "Really? Because I think it's exactly what it looks like. How long has this been going on?" Laura's eyes filled with tears. It just happened. We didn't mean for." "Bullshit," I spat. "Don't lie to me, Laura. Not now." Richard cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this like adults." I rounded on him, fury coursing through my veins. "Discuss what?" "How you've been screwing my wife behind my back. How you invited us to that party just so you could sink your claws into her." "That's not fair," Laura interjected. "Richard didn't force me into anything. I have feelings for him." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, gripping the doorframe for support. "Feelings? What about your feelings for me? Your husband?" Laura's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Jeremy. I never meant to hurt you. But with Richard, I feel alive. Excited. He can give me things you can't." Richard nodded, placing a possessive hand on Laura's shoulder. "It's true, Jeremy. Laura deserves the best, and I can provide that for her." Something snapped inside me. In 2 strides, I crossed the room and landed a solid punch on Richard's jaw. He stumbled back, crashing into his desk. "Jeremy!" Laura cried, rushing to Richard's side. I stood there, my chest heaving, watching as my wife tended to the man she'd betrayed me for. The absurdity of the situation hit me, and I let out a hollow laugh. "You deserve each other," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "A cheating wife and a backstabbing boss. Match made in heaven." Laura turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Jeremy, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save it, Laura. We're done. I want you out of the house by the time I get home." "You can't just throw me out," she protested. I raised an eyebrow. "Watch me. Or would you prefer I call the police and have you removed for trespassing?" Richard, rubbing his jaw, spoke up. "Now, Jeremy, there's no need for threats. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement." I laughed bitterly. "An arrangement? Here's an arrangement for you, Richard. I quit. Effective immediately. And you can expect to hear from my lawyer about a sexual harassment suit." His eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I growled. "I've got nothing left to lose, thanks to you too." I turned to leave, but Laura's voice stopped me. "Jeremy, wait. I still love you." I looked back at her, feeling nothing but a cold, empty void where my heart used to be. "No, Laura, you don't. If you did, we wouldn't be here." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I stormed down the stairs and out to my car, I could hear Laura calling after me, but I didn't look back. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and grief. How could Laura do this to me? How could I have been so blind? Every moment, every shared laugh, every kiss now felt tainted. Eventually, I found myself parked outside our house. Our home, the one we'd chosen together, filled with dreams of a future that now lay shattered at my feet. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. I hesitated for a moment, then unlocked it and stepped inside. The house was quiet, but I could hear movement upstairs. Laura appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes red and puffy. "Jeremy," she said softly, "I didn't expect you back so soon." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "Packing your bags?" She nodded, descending the stairs slowly. "Jeremy, can we talk? Please." "I think we've said all there is to say," I replied coldly. Laura reached the bottom of the stairs, wringing her hands. "I know I've hurt you. Terribly. But 7 years of marriage has to count for something, doesn't it?" I laughed humorlessly. "It counted for something. Right up until you decided to fuck my boss." She flinched at my words. "I made a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But I love you, Jeremy. We can work through this." For a moment, I almost wavered. The look in her eyes, so full of regret and longing, tugged at something deep inside me. But then I remembered the scene in Richard's office, and my resolve hardened. "No, Laura, we can't. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." "What about our life together?" she pleaded. "Our plans, our dreams?" I shook my head. "They died the moment you decided Richard was more important than our marriage." Laura stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. I jerked away as if burned. "Don't," I warned. "Just don't." She let her hand fall, tears streaming down her face. "What happens now?" I straightened, my voice flat and businesslike. "Now, you leave. I'll have my lawyer draw up divorce papers. We'll sell the house and split the proceeds. Anything else can be handled through our attorneys." "Just like that," she whispered. 7 years, over in an instant? I met her gaze, letting her see the full depth of my anger and pain. "You ended it, Laura. The moment you chose Richard over me." Laura's face crumpled. "It wasn't a choice, Jeremy. It just happened. Things like this don't just happen." I spat. "You made a series of decisions that led to this moment. Own up to it." She reached for me again. "Please, can we talk about this? Really talk?" I stepped back, my voice cold. "There's nothing to talk about. Pack your things and get out." "Where am I supposed to go?" Laura's voice rose, panic creeping in. "That's not my problem anymore. I'm sure Richard has plenty of room in his mansion." Laura's eyes flashed. "Is that what this is about? Richard's money?" I laughed bitterly. "You think I care about his money? I cared about our vows, Laura. Our life together. You threw that away." "I made a mistake," she cried. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. This is a betrayal." Laura's shoulders slumped. "What about everything we've been through? Doesn't that count for anything?" I met her gaze, my voice steady. "It counted for everything. Until you decided it didn't." She wiped her eyes. "So that's it? We're over?" "We were over the moment I walked into that office. Now, I want you gone by morning." Laura nodded slowly, defeat written across her face. Can I at least call you? Once things have settled?" "No," I said firmly. "We're done, Laura. Completely. Any further communication goes through our lawyers." She turned, heading back upstairs. At the top, she paused. "I truly am sorry, Jeremy." I didn't respond, watching her disappear into what used to be our bedroom. As I heard drawers opening and closing, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The life I thought I had was gone, shattered in an instant by the two people I trusted most. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a cold resolve settling over me. They wouldn't get away with this. I'd make sure of it. The weeks following Laura's departure passed in a blur. The divorce proceedings were quick, thanks to Laura's guilt and my ruthless determination. She took minimal assets, clearly banking on her new life with Richard. As I sat in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, my phone rang. It was Armando Thompson, my friend and former colleague. "Jeremy, man, how are you holding up?" Armando's voice was laced with concern. I sighed. "As well as can be expected when your wife cheats on you with your boss. Listen, I heard what happened. It's all over the office. I'm so sorry, man." "Thanks, Armando. I appreciate it." There was a pause. "So, what are you going to do now?" I leaned back, a plan forming in my mind. "I'm not sure yet, but I know I can't let them get away with this." Armando's voice lowered. "What are you thinking?" I'm thinking it's time Richard Harper faced some consequences for his actions. Jeremy, Armando said cautiously, be careful. Richard's powerful. He could make your life hell. I laughed darkly. My life's already hell, Armando. What more could he do? Look, why don't we meet up? Grab a drink, talk things through? I hesitated, then agreed. All right. The usual place in an hour? An hour later, I sat across from Armando in a dimly lit bar. He pushed a beer towards me. So, Spill, what's going on in that head of yours? I took a long swig before answering. I know things about Richard, Armando, things that could bring him down. Armando leaned forward, his voice low. What kind of things? Unethical business practices, for starters. Maybe worse. Jeremy, Armando warned. That's dangerous territory. I met his gaze. I know, but I can't just sit back and watch them live happily ever after while my life is in shambles. Armando sighed. I get it, man. I do. But are you sure this is the right way? It's the only way, I said firmly. Richard needs to pay for what he's done. Armando was quiet for a moment. Then, all right. If you're sure about this, I've got your back. What do you need? I felt a wave of gratitude. For now, just your support, and maybe some help gathering evidence. He nodded. You've got it. But Jeremy, promise me you'll be careful. This could backfire spectacularly. I know the risks, I assured him, but I've got nothing left to lose. Over the next few weeks, Armando and I worked tirelessly, combing through files and records. My intimate knowledge of the company's inner workings proved invaluable. One night, as we pored over documents in my apartment, Armando let out a low whistle. Jeremy, look at this. These financial reports don't add up. I leaned over, scanning the papers. You're right. It looks like Richard's been cooking the books. Armando said, this is big, man. Really big. I nodded, a smile on my face. It's exactly what we need. So what's the plan? Go to the authorities? I shook my head. Not yet. We need to play this smart. Strategic leaks to investors and the media. Build the pressure slowly. Armando looked uncertain. Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. I'm sure. Richard and Laura thought they could walk all over me. It's time they learned they picked the wrong man to cross. As we continued gathering evidence, I began crafting anonymous tips to key investors and journalists. Each leak was carefully timed, designed to raise suspicion without revealing our hand too soon. One evening, as I was about to send another email, Armando called. Jeremy, have you seen the news? Harper Tech stock is starting to slip. I allowed myself a small smile. Good. It's working. Armando's voice was tense. Richard's on the warpath. He's convinced there's a mole in the company. Let him think that, I said coldly. The paranoia will only make him slip up more. And Laura? Any word on her? I paused, pushing down the twinge of pain her name still caused. No, and I don't care. She made her choice. As I hung up, I stared at the computer screen, my finger hovering over the send button. This email would expose a particularly damaging piece of information about Richard's dealings. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I really prepared to destroy the man's life? Then I remembered the look on his face when I caught him with Laura, the smug superiority in his eyes. I clicked send. As I watched the email disappear into cyberspace, I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. The game was on, and I intended to win. Richard Harper and Laura were about to learn that betrayal comes at a steep price. The fallout from the leaked information was swift and merciless. I watched from the sidelines as Harper Tech stock plummeted. Investors pulled out in droves, and lawsuits started piling up. My phone rang. It was Armando. Jeremy, have you seen the news? I flicked on the TV, where a grim-faced reporter stood outside Harper Tech's headquarters. Harper Technologies is facing unprecedented scrutiny following allegations of financial misconduct. CEO Richard Harper has yet to comment on the situation. I see it, I replied. This is insane, man, Armando said, his voice a mix of awe and concern. The company's in free fall. I watched as the camera panned to show a group of angry protesters outside the building. Good. It's about time Richard faced some consequences. Jeremy, Armando's voice lowered. Are you sure about this? There's no going back now. I gripped the phone tighter. I'm sure. Richard thought he could take everything from me. Now it's my turn. As I hung up, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a stern-looking man in a suit. Jeremy Walton? He asked, flashing a badge. I'm Detective Ryan Blake. I need to ask you some questions about Harper Technologies. I kept my face neutral. Of course, Detective. Please, come in. As Blake settled onto my couch, I offered him a coffee, which he declined. Mr. Walton, you were the lead counsel for Harper Tech until recently, correct? I nodded. That's right. I left the company about a month ago. Blake leaned forward. And why did you leave? Personal reasons, I said smoothly. I felt it was time for a change. Interesting timing, Blake mused. Right before all this trouble started. I met his gaze steadily. Are you implying something, Detective? He held up his hands. Just gathering information, Mr. Walton. Did you notice anything suspicious during your time at the company? I feigned thoughtfulness. Nothing concrete. There were always rumors, of course, but in a company that size, that's not unusual. Blake nodded, jotting something in his notebook. And your relationship with Richard Harper? I understand there was some personal conflict. My jaw tightened. I'm not sure how that's relevant to your investigation, Detective. Just trying to understand the full picture, Blake said mildly. Your ex-wife is currently in a relationship with Mr. Harper, isn't she? I stood abruptly. I think we're done here, Detective. If you have any more questions, you can direct them to my lawyer. Blake rose slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. Of course, Mr. Walton. Thank you for your time. As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it, heart pounding. The investigation was getting too close for comfort. I needed to be more careful. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th. Come alone. L. Laura. My stomach churned, but curiosity won out. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The warehouse was dimly lit and musty. Laura stood in the center, looking pale and drawn. Jeremy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. I kept my distance. What do you want, Laura? She wrung her hands. It's Richard. He's not the man I thought he was. I laughed bitterly. Figured that out, did you? A bit late, isn't it? Laura's eyes filled with tears. I know I hurt you, Jeremy. I'm so sorry. But Richard, he's dangerous. He's paranoid, lashing out at everyone. He thinks someone's out to get him. Sounds like Richard's problems are his own, I said coldly. Why are you telling me this? She stepped closer. Because I'm scared, Jeremy. And I think you might be in danger too. I raised an eyebrow. Me? Why would I be in danger? Laura looked around nervously. Richard's convinced there's a mole, someone leaking information. He's mentioned your name a few times. My heart raced, but I kept my face impassive. That's ridiculous. I haven't been near the company in weeks. I know, but Richard's not thinking rationally. He's looking for someone to blame, and she trailed off. And what, Laura? Spit it out. She met my gaze. And I'm afraid of what he might do. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Why tell me this? Why not go to the police? Laura laughed humorlessly. With what evidence? Besides, Richard has half the police force in his pocket. I ran a hand through my hair, conflicted. Part of me wanted to tell Laura to go to hell, to let her deal with the consequences of her choices. But another part, a part one thought I'd buried, still cared. What do you want from me, Laura? I asked tiredly. She reached out, then thought better of it. Just be careful, Jeremy. Watch your back. And if you know anything about what's happening to the company, I cut her off. I don't. And even if I did, why would I help Richard? Laura's shoulders slumped. I'm not asking you to help Richard. I'm asking you to help yourself. If he finds out you're involved. I'm not involved, I said firmly. Now, if that's all, I think we're done here. As I turned to leave, Laura called out, Jeremy? I really am sorry. For everything. I paused at the door but didn't look back. Goodbye, Laura. As I drove home, my mind raced. Laura's warning had rattled me more than I cared to admit. If Richard was as unstable as she claimed, I needed to be more careful. My phone rang. It was Armando. Jeremy, we've got a problem. Someone's been poking around the server logs at work. They're trying to trace the leaks. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Can they trace it back to us? Not yet, Armando said, but it's only a matter of time. We need to cover our tracks better. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Agreed. Meet me at my place in an hour. We need to regroup. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the game had suddenly become much more dangerous. But I was in too deep to back out now. Richard Harper was going down, no matter the cost. An hour later, Armando and I sat in my living room, laptops open, trying to cover our digital tracks. We need to be smarter about this, Armando said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Richard's got his tech team working overtime to find the source of the leaks. I nodded, rubbing my temples. What if we use a different approach? Instead of digital leaks, we could find a sympathetic journalist. Feed them information directly. Armando looked up, intrigued. That could work. But who? Most of the local media is in Richard's pocket. I might have an idea, I said, reaching for my phone. Remember Sophia Martinez? She used to work for the Tribune before moving to that investigative journalism outfit. Sophia? Yeah, I remember her. Didn't you two have a thing back in law school? I shook my head. We were just friends. But she's always been passionate about exposing corporate corruption. This could be right up her alley. I dialed Sophia's number, hoping she hadn't changed it. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Sophia Martinez speaking. Sophia? It's Jeremy. Jeremy Walton. There was a pause. Jeremy? Wow, it's been ages. How are you? I've been better, I admitted. Listen, I've got a story you might be interested in. It's big, and it's explosive. Are you free to meet? Sophia's voice lowered. How big are we talking? Harper Technology's big. Corporate fraud, cooking the books, the works. I could practically hear her sit up straighter. I'm listening. Where and when? We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe the next day. As I hung up, Armando gave me a worried look. Are you sure about this, Jeremy? Bringing someone else in is risky? I nodded firmly. We need to escalate this, Armando. Richard's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous. We need to end this quickly. Armando sighed. All right, man. I trust you. Just be careful, okay? As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were entering a new phase of this war, one that would determine everything. The next day, I sat in the corner booth of a small cafe, nursing a coffee and waiting for Sophia. When she walked in, I was struck by how little she'd changed. Same determined stride, same sharp eyes scanning the room. Jeremy, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. It's good to see you. I managed a small smile. You too, Sophia. Thanks for meeting me. She waved away my thanks. Are you kidding? A potential expose on Harper Technologies? I'd be crazy not to hear you out. I leaned forward. Before I tell you anything, I need your word. This stays between us until we're ready to go public. Sophia's eyes narrowed. Jeremy, what's really going on here? This isn't just about a story, is it? I hesitated, then decided to trust her. No, it's not. It's personal. Over the next hour, I told her everything. The affair, the betrayal, the evidence we'd gathered. Sophia listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. Jesus, Jeremy. This is huge. And incredibly dangerous. I nodded. I know. But I can't let them get away with this, Sophia. Will you help me? She studied me for a long moment. All right, I'm in. But we do this my way. No more anonymous leaks. We build a solid case, then we blow this wide open. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Sophia. You don't know what this means to me. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I think I do. And Jeremy? I'm sorry about Laura. You deserved better. As we left the cafe, plans in place, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Sophia on our side, we had a real chance of bringing Richard down. Over the next few weeks, Sophia, Armando, and I worked tirelessly. We cross-referenced financial records, tracked down former employees willing to talk, and built an ironclad case against Richard Harper. One evening, as Sophia and I pored over documents in my apartment, she suddenly sat back, rubbing her eyes. "Jeremy, can I ask you something?" I looked up from my laptop. "Of course. Are you sure this is what you want? Revenge won't undo what happened with Laura." I felt a flare of anger. This isn't just about Laura. It's about justice. Richard's been corrupt for years, hurting people, ruining lives. He needs to be stopped. Sophia held up her hands. "I get it. I do. I care about you, Jeremy. I don't want to see you consumed by this." Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw something there. Something that made my heart skip a beat. But before I could respond, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Jeremy Walton?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Julia Harper. I'm Richard's sister. We need to talk." I met Julia Harper in a small park on the outskirts of town. She was a striking woman, with the same piercing eyes as her brother, but there was a warmth in them that Richard lacked. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Walton," she said, extending her hand. I shook it firmly. "Call me Jeremy." "What's this about, Ms. Harper?" "Julia, please." She sat on a nearby bench, gesturing for me to join her. "I know what you're doing, Jeremy. The leaks, the investigation. I want to help." I tensed, ready to deny everything, but something in her expression stopped me. "Why would you want to help take down your own brother?" Julia's face hardened. "Because Richard stopped being my brother a long time ago. He's hurt too many people, destroyed too many lives. It's time someone stood up to him." I studied her carefully. "What kind of help are you offering?" She reached into her bag, pulling out a USB drive. "Financial records, emails, proof of tax evasion and embezzlement. Enough to bury Richard for good." My heart raced as I took the drive. "Why give this to me? Why not go to the authorities yourself?" Julia smiled sadly. "Because I'm a coward, Jeremy. I've been afraid of Richard for years. But you? You've got nothing left to lose. You'll see this through." As she stood to leave, I called after her. "Julia, thank you. This changes everything." She turned back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Just promise me one thing, Jeremy. Make him pay. For all of us." I nodded solemnly. "I promise." That night, I called an emergency meeting with Sophia and Armando. As we went through the files Julia had provided, the full extent of Richard's corruption became clear. "This is it," Sophia breathed, her eyes wide. "With this, we can take him down for good." Armando nodded. "But we need to be smart about this. Richard's got friends in high places. If we don't play this right, he could still wriggle out of it." I leaned back, my mind racing. "We need to time this perfectly. Hit him when he's most vulnerable." Sophia snapped her fingers. "The company's annual shareholder meeting. It's in 2 weeks. Richard always uses it to make big announcements, boost investor confidence." A slow smile spread across my face. "Perfect. We release everything just before the meeting. He'll be blindsided, with nowhere to hide." As we hammered out the details of our plan, my phone buzzed. A text from Laura. "We need to talk. It's urgent." I showed the message to Sophia and Armando. "What do you think?" Sophia frowned. "It could be a trap. Richard might be using her to get to you. Or she might have more information we can use," Armando countered. I stared at the message, conflicted. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to cut Laura out of my life completely. But another part, the part that remembered the good times, couldn't let it go. "I'll meet her," I decided. "But I'll be careful, and I won't tell her anything about our plans." Sophia touched my arm, her eyes concerned. "Just be careful, Jeremy. Don't let her manipulate you again." I nodded, touched by her concern. "I won't. This time, I know exactly who she is." The next day, I met Laura at the restaurant where she now worked as a waitress. The irony wasn't lost on me, the woman who had left me for a wealthy tech mogul, now serving tables. "Jeremy," she said as I approached, her voice small. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from her, keeping my face neutral. "What do you want, Laura?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her apron. I need help. Richard. He's not the man I thought he was. I laughed bitterly. Figured that out, did you? A bit late, isn't it? Laura flinched at my tone. I know I hurt you, Jeremy. I'm so sorry. But Richard, he's dangerous. He knows someone's leaking information, and he's out for blood. I leaned forward, my voice low. And what makes you think I care about Richard's problems? Her eyes met mine, filled with fear. Because I think he suspects you. He's been asking questions, digging into your past. I'm afraid of what he might do. For a moment, I felt a flicker of concern. Not for Richard, but for the people helping me, Armando, Sophia, even Julia. If Richard was onto us, they could be in danger too. Why are you telling me this, Laura? I asked, my voice hard. Why now? She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. Because despite everything, I still care about you, Jeremy. I don't want to see you get hurt. I pulled my hand back, standing up. You lost the right to care about me when you chose Richard. If you really want to help, stay out of my way. As I walked away, I heard Laura call out, her voice breaking. Jeremy, please, be careful. I didn't look back. That night, as I relayed the conversation to Sophia and Armando, we all agreed we needed to accelerate our timeline. If Richard's getting suspicious, we can't wait for the shareholder meeting, Armando said. We need to release everything now. Sophia nodded, her face set with determination. I've got the article ready. One word from you, and I'll publish it, along with all the evidence. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the point of no return. Once we released this information, there would be no going back. I thought of Laura's warning, of Julia's tears, of all the people Richard had hurt over the years. My resolve hardened. Do it, I said, my voice steady. Release everything. As Sophia hit publish on her laptop, I felt a strange mix of emotion, satisfaction, fear, and a determination. The final blow had been struck. Now, we would see if it was enough to bring down Richard Harper once and for all. The morning after we released the evidence, I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly. Messages, missed calls, and news alerts flooded my screen. I sat up, my heart racing as I opened the first news article. Harper Technologies CEO, Richard Harper accused of massive fraud. I couldn't help but smile. It was happening. Everything we'd worked for was finally coming to fruition. My phone rang. It was Sophia. Jeremy, turn on the news. Now. I scrambled for the remote, flicking on the TV. Richard's face filled the screen, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled, eyes wild. These accusations are completely false, he was saying, his voice strained. This is a coordinated attack on Harper Technologies by our competitors. We will fight these baseless claims. The feed cut back to the news anchor. That was Richard Harper, CEO of Harper Technologies, responding to the bombshell allegations of fraud and embezzlement that broke this morning. We'll keep you updated as this story develops. Jeremy? You there? Sophia's voice brought me back to the phone. Yeah, I'm here. It's really happening, isn't it? It is. But Jeremy, this is just the beginning. Richard's going to fight back hard. Are you ready for what comes next? I stood, walking to the window. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware that everything was about to change. I'm ready, Sophia. Whatever it takes. Good. Because I just got word that the SEC is launching a formal investigation. They want to talk to us. My breath caught. Us? They know we're involved? Not exactly. But as former employees with insider knowledge, we're on their list of people to interview. We need to be careful, Jeremy. One wrong move, and we could be implicated too. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Understood. Let's meet at your office in an hour. We need to get our stories straight. As I hung up, another call came through. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Walton? A gruff voice I didn't recognize. This is Detective Blake. We need to talk. My heart raced. Detective, what's this about? I think you know, Mr. Walton. The Harper Technologies situation. I'd like you to come down to the station for a chat. I try to keep my voice steady. Am I under arrest, Detective? Not at this time, but I strongly suggest you cooperate. Things will go a lot smoother if you do. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I understand. I'll be there in 2 hours. I need to contact my lawyer first. 2 hours, Mr. Walton. Don't be late. The line went dead. I immediately dialed Armando. Armando, it's happening. The police want to talk to me. We need to move fast. Shit, Armando muttered. Okay, don't panic. We planned for this, remember? Stick to the story. You had suspicions, you gathered some evidence, but you didn't know the full extent until Sophia's article broke. Got it? Got it. Thanks, Armando. For everything. There was a pause. Jeremy, be careful, man. This could get ugly fast. I ended the call, my mind racing. As I got dressed, preparing to face whatever came next, my doorbell rang. I approached cautiously, checking the peephole. My blood ran cold. It was Laura. For a moment, I considered ignoring her. But something in her posture, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, made me open the door. Laura, what are you doing here? She pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes wild. Jeremy, you need to run. Now. I closed the door, frowning. What are you talking about? Richard, she said, her voice trembling. He knows. He knows it was you behind the leaks. He's not himself, Jeremy. I've never seen him like this. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. And why should I believe you? How do I know this isn't some trick? Laura's eyes filled with tears. Because I made a terrible mistake, and I'm trying to make it right. Please, Jeremy, you're in danger. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Sophia, urgent. Richard's holding an emergency press conference at HT headquarters. 30 minutes. I looked up at Laura, my mind racing. There's a press conference at Harper Tech in 30 minutes. I need to be there. Laura grabbed my arm. No, didn't you hear what I said? It's not safe. I shook her off. I heard you. But this ends today, one way or another. As I grabbed my keys, Laura called out, her voice breaking. Jeremy, I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that. I paused at the door, not looking back. You're right, Laura. It doesn't change anything. The drive to Harper Tech headquarters was tense. Streets were clogged with news vans and curious onlookers. As I approached the building, I spotted Sophia in the crowd. Jeremy, she called, waving me over. What are you doing here? This is too risky. I shook my head. I need to see this through, Sophia. We both do. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we stay on the edges. If things go south, we need a quick exit. We pushed our way through the crowd, finding a spot with a clear view of the hastily erected podium. Camera flashes lit up the area as Richard stepped up to the microphone. He looked terrible. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by a haggard, desperate man. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice hoarse. I stand before you today to address the baseless accusations that have been leveled against me and Harper Technologies. The crowd murmured, cameras clicking furiously. These allegations are nothing more than a coordinated attack by our competitors and disgruntled former employees. I have here, he held up a folder, evidence that will exonerate me and expose the true criminals behind this smear campaign. My heart raced. What evidence? Had we missed something? Richard's eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, I swore they locked onto mine. A cruel smile twisted his lips. In fact, he continued, his voice rising, I believe the mastermind behind this attack is here with us today. Jeremy Walton. Why don't you come up here and face me like a man? The crowd turned, heads swiveling as they searched for me. Sophia grabbed my arm. Jeremy, we need to go. Now. But before we could move, a commotion erupted near the podium. Detective Blake pushed his way through, flanked by uniformed officers. Richard Harper, Blake's voice boomed through the speakers, you're under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. The crowd erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and in the center of it all, Richard struggled against the officers trying to handcuff him. This is a mistake, he yelled. I'm innocent. It was Walton. Arrest him. As the officers led Richard away, his eyes found mine in the crowd. The hatred in them was palpable. "This isn't over, Jeremy," he shouted. "You'll pay for this." I watched, a mix of emotions swirling inside me, as Richard was pushed into a police car. It was over. We'd won. Sophia squeezed my hand. "We did it, Jeremy. It's done." But as I looked at the chaos around us, the reporters clamoring for statements, the shocked faces of Harper Tech employees, I knew this was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. In the days that followed Richard's arrest, my life became a whirlwind of police interviews, SEC depositions, and endless media requests. Through it all, Sophia stood by my side, a constant source of support and strength. One evening, as we sat in my apartment reviewing our statements for the upcoming trial, Sophia set down her papers with a sigh. "Jeremy," she said, her voice soft, "we need to talk about what happens next." I looked up, frowning. "What do you mean? We've got the trial, the media coverage." She shook her head. "No, I mean after all this. What do you want, Jeremy? Really want?" I leaned back, the question catching me off guard. For so long, my sole focus had been taking down Richard. I hadn't allowed myself to think beyond that. I don't know," I admitted. "I've been so focused on revenge, on making them pay, that I haven't really thought about what comes after." Sophia leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Well, maybe it's time you did. You've got your whole life ahead of you, Jeremy. A brilliant legal mind, connections, a story that people want to hear. You could do anything." I stood, walking to the window. The city lights twinkled below, full of possibilities I hadn't let myself consider. "What about you, Sophia? What do you want?" I heard her stand, felt her presence behind me. "I want to keep making a difference, exposing corruption, fighting for justice. And—" she hesitated. "I want you to be part of that, part of my life." I turned, meeting her gaze. The air between us crackled with unspoken tension. "Sophia, A sharp knock at the door interrupted us. We exchanged a look of confusion before I went to answer it. I opened the door to find Laura standing there, her eyes red-rimmed, her clothes disheveled. "Laura, what are you doing here?" She pushed past me into the apartment, then stopped short when she saw Sophia. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "I didn't realize you had company." Sophia stood, her posture stiff. "I was just leaving. Jeremy, I'll call you tomorrow." As she gathered her things, Laura turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Jeremy, please. I need to talk to you. Alone." I looked between the two women, torn. Finally, I nodded to Sophia. "I'll walk you out." In the hallway, Sophia grabbed my arm. "Jeremy, be careful. Remember everything she put you through?" I squeezed her hand. "I know. Don't worry. This won't take long." Back in the apartment, Laura had sunk onto the couch, her head in her hands. "What do you want, Laura?" She looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've lost everything, Jeremy. My job, my friends, my reputation. All because I was stupid enough to believe Richard's lies." I felt a flicker of pity, quickly squashed by the memory of her betrayal. "That was your choice, Laura. You have to live with the consequences." She stood, moving towards me. "I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I needed you to know how sorry I am. For everything." I stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. "Is that all?" Laura's shoulders slumped. "I guess I was hoping. I don't know what I was hoping. That maybe, somehow, we could start over." I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. "Start over? After everything that's happened? Laura, we're done. We've been done since the moment I saw you with Richard." She flinched at my words. "I understand. I miss you, Jeremy. I miss us." For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the good times we'd shared. The laughter, the love, the dreams we'd had. But those memories were tainted now, poisoned by her betrayal. "It's too late, Laura. What we had is gone. And honestly, I'm glad. Because losing you led me here, to this moment. And I wouldn't change that for anything." Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'll go. But Jeremy?" I hope you find happiness. You deserve it. As she reached the door, I called out, Laura. She turned, hope flickering in her eyes. Take care of yourself, I said, reaching into my wallet. I pulled out all the cash I had, holding it out to her. Here. It's not much, but it should help until you get back on your feet. Laura stared at the money, then back at me. Jeremy, I can't. Take it, I insisted. Not for you. For the person I used to be. The one who loved you. With trembling hands, she took the cash. Thank you, she whispered. As the door closed behind her, I leaned against it, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It was truly over now. The last ties to my old life cut. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. You okay? I smiled, typing back. Better than okay. Want to grab dinner tomorrow? We have a future to plan. Her response was immediate. It's a date. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was different from the one who had started this journey of revenge. Stronger, wiser, ready for whatever came next. Richard was facing justice. Laura was out of my life for good, and I had a fresh start, with endless possibilities ahead. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. The day of Richard's sentencing dawned bright and clear. I stood outside the courthouse, adjusting my tie as cameras flashed around me. Mr. Walton, a reporter called out, how do you feel about today's sentencing? I turned, facing the sea of microphones. Justice will be served today. That's all I have to say for now. Sophia appeared at my side, squeezing my hand. Ready for this? I nodded, drawing strength from her presence. Let's finish this. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. I sat with Sophia, Armando, and Julia Harper in the front row. Laura was nowhere to be seen. The bailiff's voice rang out. All rise for the Honorable Judge Michaels. As the judge took her seat, Richard was led in, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit. Our eyes met, and the hatred in his gaze was palpable. Richard Harper, Judge Michaels began. You have been found guilty of multiple counts of securities fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Richard stood, his voice dripping with venom. This entire trial has been a farce. I'm the victim here, set up by jealous competitors and disgruntled ex-employees. His eyes locked onto mine. Jeremy Walton orchestrated this whole thing out of petty revenge. He's the one who should be on trial. The judge's gavel cracked through the air. Mr. Harper, you've had your day in court. The evidence against you is overwhelming. This court hereby sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $500 million in fines and restitution. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Richard's face contorted in rage. This isn't over, he shouted as he was led away. I'll appeal. You haven't heard the last of me, Walton. As we exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us. Mr. Walton, how do you respond to Richard Harper's accusations? I held up a hand for quiet. Richard Harper's accusations are as baseless as his business practices were corrupt. Justice has been served today, not just for me, but for all the employees and investors he defrauded. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Sophia guided me through the crowd to a waiting car. As we drove away, she turned to me. It's really over, Jeremy. How do you feel? I leaned back, letting out a long breath. Relieved, vindicated, and ready to move on. She smiled, taking my hand. Speaking of moving on, have you thought more about what's next? I nodded, squeezing her hand. I have, actually. I'm thinking of starting my own law firm, specializing in corporate whistleblower cases, fighting for the little guy against corrupt executives. Sophia's eyes lit up. Jeremy, that's perfect. And I might know a journalist who'd be interested in partnering on some cases. I grinned, pulling her close. Is that so? Well, I think that could be arranged. As we drove through the city, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past few months had been a whirlwind of pain, anger, and revenge. But out of that darkness, something new had emerged. A purpose, a partnership, a future. We stopped at a small park, The same one where I'd met Julia Harper all those weeks ago. As we walked hand in hand, I spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench. Laura? Sophia said, surprised. Laura stood as we approached, her eyes darting between Sophia and me. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her, more put together, though still a shadow of her former self. Jeremy, she said softly. I saw the news. About Richard's sentencing. I nodded, keeping my voice neutral. It's over. He's going away for a long time. Laura wrung her hands. I wanted to apologize. Again. For everything. And to thank you. For the money you gave me. It really helped. Sophia squeezed my hand. A silent show of support. You don't need to thank me, Laura, I said firmly. Or apologize again. What's done is done. We both need to move on with our lives. Laura's eyes filled with tears. I know. I wanted you to know that I'm trying. To be better. To make amends. I felt a wave of emotion, not love or longing, but a sort of bittersweet closure. I'm glad to hear that, Laura. I hope you find what you're looking for. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What about you? What will you do now? I glanced at Sophia, feeling a smile tug at my lips. I'm starting a new chapter. We both are. Laura's gaze shifted between us, understanding dawning in her eyes. I see. I'm happy for you, Jeremy. Really. As she turned to leave, I called out, Laura? She looked back, hope flashing across her face. My voice gentle but firm. Goodbye, Laura. We watched as she walked away, disappearing around a bend in the path. Sophia turned to me, her eyes searching my face. Are you okay? She asked softly. I took a deep breath, feeling the last vestiges of my old life fade away. Yeah, I am. For the first time in a long time, I really am. Sophia smiled, leaning in to kiss me softly. So, counselor, ready to change the world? I grinned, pulling her close. With you by my side? Absolutely. As we walked through the park, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey that had started with betrayal and a thirst for revenge had led me here to a new purpose, a new love, a new life. The sun was setting as we reached the car, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. I paused, taking in the moment. What are you thinking? Sophia asked, her eyes twinkling. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. I'm thinking, this is just the beginning. She laughed, a sound full of joy and promise. Well then, Mr. Walton, shall we get started? As we drove away, the city sprawling out before us, I felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. The past was behind me, the future bright with possibility. Richard was facing justice. Laura was out of my life. And I had found something I never expected, a partner, in work and in life, who challenged and inspired me. The man who had started this journey seeking revenge was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and ready to make a difference in the world. As we merged onto the highway, heading towards our future, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something better from the ashes of what was lost. And that's exactly what I intended to do. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.